Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. I'm continuing to play with rusty patinas and textures. January seems to me to be the month when this happens to me quite often. So last week we did some, we're using distress inks and oxides and stencils and embossing powder. I said we would work with paint, and we will, but not quite in the way I was thinking. I'm going to do that next week. I wanted to rust up some die cuts and other bits and bobs actually. So these are some of the amazing Seth Apter die cuts kindly sent to me by Seth and Sizzix. I've also got on the table here a couple of the Holtz cogs and gears, because it's obviously going to be a great technique for rusting up cogs and gears. I just cut these out of some leftover winter greenery card that I'd spritzed with various things, because I thought if I decide not to rust them, then I've got a kind of patina thing going on already. And what I want to play with to create some texture and a bit more sturdiness on these die cuts is some grit paste or texture sand paste. DecoArt do one. This is basically texture paste with little granules of texture in, so obviously granules of sand or some other medium they put in. What do I know? Somewhere I'm sure I've got an opaque one. This is the translucent. This is the grit paste Crypt, Distress Crypt, which has already got sort of various colours going on in it, but we're going to look at painting it afterwards. Texture sand paste, also a brilliant option. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some to these die cuts. You could also, you know, these little wooden craft cutouts that you can quite often find, they're a great candidate for this. You can apply it to metal somewhere, and I can't find them at the moment. I've got some really cheap, fairly flimsy metal cogs and gears. I would do this to the Holtz cogs and gears as well, the metal ones, the ideology ones. But you can do this with these. Again, I just want to say with this series, I'm not giving you fixed recipes or ingredients that must be used to create rust. I'm exploring with new combinations, different ideas, and different ways of creating these coppery patinas, these rusty textures, which I love, and the joy for me is exploring new ways each time. So this isn't about creating a big shopping list and getting everything I've got on my desk. This is about going to your stash and seeing what you might have in either those lovely coppery burnished colours or in rusty colours, and putting them to work. That's what we're doing this year. We're getting the stash out and getting it to work. So some of these, I mean, these are just incredible. The level of detail on these. If you've never seen Seth Apter's work, you must take a look, because his grungy, layered, textured, detailed work is a constant delight. So I've been preserving, I used quite a lot of these on some mussel shell tags last year, which you may have seen. So some of these I haven't got the middle bits anymore, but I just thought this could also be a really exciting panel against a background. I just love it. And one of the things that I really enjoy is combining something like this with my botanicals. So the idea of vines growing up this, or leafiness, all delicious. So let's start with, well, I don't really mind. And again, there are a number of ways of doing this. You can mix up some of your texture paste, and you don't have to use the sand paste. You can use a regular texture paste and still get a good effect with this. Mix up your sand paste in advance with some colours, with some pigment, or you can apply it and then add colour later. So I'm going to do a bit of each of those things. I might, just for the purposes of this, rather than land up with loads of texture paste all over my mat all the time, I might do this onto here, because obviously there is going to be some leftover. Let's start with just a plain bit of card so that you can see this textured paste in all its beauty. So this is a panel that I may or may not use. And again, I'm not going to look for perfect coatings. I talked last week about the imperfections of rust, and that being one of the delights. So having a bit round the edge where it's not quite covering, I think is going to be a good thing. So I need that to dry. Let's put some on one of these gears of this So you can see it's going through, but I'll be able to scrape that up and put it on something else. And what I'm also going to do is I'll do a little upwards and downwards pat. You may have seen me do that with crackle paste in the past, just to get a little bit of extra texture on the surface. Let's maybe, yeah, we might as well scrape that up and add a bit to this gear as well. So I'm gonna just get a bit of coverage. We're adding texture at the moment, not pigment, so not color. As I said, these gears are cut from green, so they've already got a bit of useful copperiness about them. We might not want to cover them up completely. I need to keep track of what I've covered and what I haven't. What's got paste on, what hasn't got paste on. Let's do one more gear with this while we've got it here. So again, I'm not necessarily looking for complete coverage on these. You maybe want places where you haven't got texture and places where you have. Places where it's properly bumpy, properly sandy and gritty. And other places where it still remains nice and smooth and sort of various textures is what we're after. So I'm going to do one of these framing panels, because I think that's going to be quite nice. And again, there's going to be some texture paste landing up through the holes here. That's inevitable. If I hold it up in mid-air, I could sort of apply it, but then I'm getting it on my fingers, so it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And we do know that inky, messy fingers are the sign of a good time, so nothing wrong with that. Let's pick up a bit more of that. So this is the Crypt grit paste. There we go. So again, just getting a bit of random texture on there. Let's see. Oh, I think these numbers are going to be quite cool if they're rusty, don't you? I think that's just going to be really funky. Let's do one set of numbers with the Crypt paste. And then we'll move on to using one of the other texture pastes. So again, this isn't about having all these texture pastes. This is about showing you that you can, oh, look how cool. So using your die cuts as a stencil, you've got that as an option. Don't underestimate the power of a die cut. It can get up to all kinds of things. So I'm trying to get this now on the numbers as opposed to on the spaces in between. There we go, that's more like it. So we've got some really quite chunky bits of texture on there and some other places where it's still completely bare. That's joyous. Might as well just use up this and pop it onto one of these wooden hearts. There we go. So I'm going to do some of these and leave them to dry, and then I'm going to show you how you can also mix up some rusty looking paste before you even start. So this obviously is going to need altering with paints and or inks and or crayons. it's all useful grist to the mill. There we go. It's going to be quite a nice rusty heart. Again, I'm going to tap up and down to get me a bit more randomized rustiness onto there. Good, that's Crypt paste. Let's have a dig around in the translucent distressed grit paste now. Which ones should we do this with? Let's put a bit of this on the metal, why not? So again, I'm just going to, this might even be better done with fingertips, just dabbed on to just spread out a little bit of rusty texture direct onto that metal. You probably don't want to heat dry that because the metal will heat up a lot. If you are heat drying it, make sure you don't hold it with your fingers. So just getting on some sandy texture, gritty texture onto there that's going to give us a nice rusty look. I don't want it too thick because that's going to look slightly strange. So just trying to get a little bit of that rusty texture onto there. And again, I'm working with lots of elements because I want to make sure I've got lots of options. If something goes wrong, then it's fine because I've got another one to play with. If I really like how something is working, then I can choose to do it multiple more times with whatever I've got on the go. There we go. So again, just applying it in variable thicknesses. That's going to take forever to dry. You can absolutely dry this with a heat tool. But since I also want to show you another thing, these can definitely be doing some drying while I do that. Let's maybe grab, oh yeah, well, why not do you? I love this one. This is amazing. And then you could sort of tuck bits of ephemera in between it, or flower petals, or all kinds of amazing stuff you can get up to. But you use, again, if you've got a die cut machine, use whatever dies you've got. You could make rusty little birds. You could make rusty leaves and flower petals. You could make rusty, dies come in infinite forms, like so many of these other crafting products. Or, as I say, if you haven't got a die cutting machine, you can get all kinds of pre-cut shapes that you can also use with your grit paste, or, as I say, regular texture paste. You can even stir some sand, dig it out of the garden, into your regular texture paste. Sorry, am I heading off camera? Apologies. When we get to the painting section, I'll zoom in a little bit so that you've got a bit more. And really, come on, pay attention and keep track of what's got paste and what hasn't. Let's do this one as well while we're at it, because there's quite a lot of paste still on the mat here. Let's pop a bit of that there. Good. Now, my DecoArt texture sand paste hasn't been out for quite a long time. I'm hoping it hasn't dried up. There we go. So we've got some texture on there. You can see I'm really not being careful about this. I'm getting it done. This is mixed media, messy, fun playtime, exploration. Oh, so this is stodgier than it has been. Actually, let's keep that for a ready painted one. As I say, in a minute we're going to look at mixing up some paste with pigment to start. Oh, can you hear the sand in there? Really, really sandy scraping of the teeth. That thing when you've been to the beach and you've just got sand in your shoes. That's the noise that reminds me of. So this one is an opaque paste. So that's just got a bit more chalky opacity to it. Doesn't really matter because we're going to paint over the top anyway, but it will give us a slightly different finish probably in the long run, especially if you're using any vaguely translucent paints, or if you're using inks to tint things. Where you've used an opaque paste, it's going to end up looking a little bit different from when you use a translucent paste. So it's also just worth knowing that all these incredible products are on the market. And at some point, if you decide that rust is a thing that excites you as much as rust excites me, I might put a little bit of, I might mix and match. Again, I'm just enjoying using these things as stencils and seeing the texture paste that lands up on the card behind. But you can see why I didn't want to do this on the mat. I'd have to wipe it up every 3 minutes to be able to go onwards. So you can see what I mean. That's covering up the green much more than where I put either of the translucent pastes onto those. But given we're going to paint them red or brown or orange or whatever it might be, quite tempted to do another of these framing pieces with a bit of this sandy one. Grand. And then what we'll do is we'll mix some paint into this opaque paste and apply it, and we'll mix some paint into the translucent paste, and you'll be able to see the difference between those two options and the finishes they get you. There's no right, there's no wrong. There is playing and discovering what gives you joy. And what gives you joy may be different from what gives me joy. It ought to be. Because if we all got joy from the exact same things, it would be a pretty boring world, I think. There we go. That's really quite textured. It's going to take a while to dry. But you, as I say, there's nothing wrong with giving these a blast with the heat tool. I will do some of my other plans in the meantime. Did I put, yeah, I seem to have put, I really have been working quite quickly. That's already got paste on. Let's do another panel. Well, we could do a painted panel. Okay, so now here I will start to use the matte, because this is the silicone craft matte, which means that things will wipe up from it very easily. I don't want my paint soaking into the paper, that's the thing. So on here, it'll stay more present. You can see this texture paste is drying out really quite quickly. That's because it's old and hasn't been opened for a while. So I'm going to pop that on there. I'm going to use a little bit of, I've got PaperArtsy. What have I got? I just pulled out what looked rusty. So it doesn't really matter what I've got. This is Brown Shed, which seems like a good rusty colour. Seth Apter actually has a colour called Rusty with PaperArtsy. That's really quite red. Okay, I'm going to see if I can tone that down. This is DecoArt Media Liquid Acrylic, transparent yellow iron oxide, which is a good rusty colour. Andy Skinner is the source of lots of my rusty inspiration. Amazing British artist and media creator. That's got quite a nice tone to it. So I said I was going to zoom in, didn't I? Let me do that. So I think what I also want is an option where it's maybe a bit darker. I quite like a dark brown rust. That's my favoured rust. Bright orange rust, not so much my thing. But as you can see, I've mixed up sort of a palette of rusts there, so that I'm going to be able to apply a variety of rusty textured paste to my, well, let's start with this piece of card. I think you can probably hear the rusty delight that's going on there. So that's going straight on as a brilliant piece of rust, textured straight away. I can add more layers of pigment later to add shadows, to create highlights in that, but for now what I might do is put the lid now back on that texture sand paste. Let's go with some numbers, shall we? Let's get some of this on some numbers, and then I think you'll be able to see why I'm excited about rusting the numbers, because I think they're going to look pretty darn special in rust. Let's get a bit of the dark at that end, a little bit on the top of the 6 and the 7, 5, 8, 9. Let's get the 1 in. And again, I'm sort of all right if there are little tiny bits of white left showing, because I can always ink them later, or I could add a bit of coppery patina to those. That's pretty good. See the rusty texture on that? Very cool. Let's go with a bit of the dark. See what I mean about those dark rusts? That's my bag. Okay, let's try and again keep straight what I've done with what. Let's put a bit of this, since there's some left on the mat. And if I put it on both sides of the die cut, then I'm going to end up with something that is really much sturdier than just paper. So that by this method, you can turn a paper die cut into something like almost like a metal embellishment. So that's one side. We'll use some of this up onto the other side. Scrape, 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 sand, sand, sand. This may either be doing terrible things to you and setting your teeth on edge, or it may be giving you a really enjoyable ASMR experience. Could go either way, couldn't it? Let's pick that up, that fishbone. So at the moment, that's moist and therefore fairly fragile, but once that dries, that will be really quite a stable embellishment to add to a project. Let's scrape the rest of this up onto this wooden heart. Let's go scrape, scrape, scrape. And because I've now, it's become a homogeneous colour now. I haven't been able to keep the yellow at one end and the dark at the other. It's all become sort of one. But as I say, I can afterwards add detail with the top layers, as we're going to do with these. I could, well, is there any point? Oh, I have got one of these left to do this with. So let's apply. So here I hope you'll see the advantage of having cut these out of green paper. I can leave a bit of that green unrusted, and that's already got a sort of copperiness going on behind. Grand. These ones we're going to paint later, but you know, why not start us off with a little sneak peek of where they might be going to get to. They're all still drying, that's great. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, and then we'll do just a little bit with the translucent paste. Then we'll add paint over the top of some, hopefully by then, dried pastes. I'm just maybe going to do one, I think, with the translucent paste, just so you can see there is a slight difference when you mix it up. And for a fair test, I guess I should use the same paint. So it was a bit of brown shed. I think I might try to get a bit less brown shed this time. I think it rather overwhelmed things the last go round. Oh, there it goes again. And it was the transparent yellow iron oxide. Let's have a bit of that out. Come on, there we go. There it is. And a bit of raw umber. I did also mean to do a few of these in coppery colours as well, so I will try to remember to do that before I stop. So that's mixed up with the yellow iron oxide. Let's put in a bit of brown shed, and let's put in a bit of raw umber at that end. So again, nice rustiness. What did we do? We did some numbers. We did, oh, well, doesn't have to be the same thing, does it? You can see the difference applied to paper. Let's do it on this one. So on it goes. Oh, there's much less paste. I'm going to get out some more paste. I've got more paint than I have paste now, so I am going to end up with more. I'm going to try to remember not to cover all my bits of paper. Oh, there's a nice look. There's a panel we can do again here, just to see what the difference is between having a translucent paste mixed. It may not be much, because I have got an opaque paint in here, so that is transforming the translucent paste to a more opaque look, whereas if I were to use inks or translucent or transparent paint, that would make a difference. But I think actually there might be a slight difference regardless. So that's a rusty panel, and let's carry on here what we were doing. Now that I've got a bit more sand in the mix, there we go. Let's get the dark end, because we've already established I like the dark end of the rusty spectrum. There we go. Again, if I apply to both sides of here, I notice I've managed to snip that one apart. If I apply to both sides of here, I'll get a much more stable piece of effect. Oh, sorry, gone off camera. That's the trouble with zooming in. I try to zoom in to give you a good view, and then I end up going off camera because I forget I've zoomed in. That's really quite cool texture. And what I might do when we come to painting things later is I might just add, once that's dry, a little bit of, again, highlighting. And oh well, I've got lots of hearts here, so I could use this up on a couple more hearts, couldn't I? These you can pick up round here for, they're usually around a pound, €1 a box, or a couple of euros at most. And you get lots and lots of embellishments, and then of course you can alter them in lots of different ways with straight paint. You can alter them with embossing powders. So from a box of sort of fairly humble wooden cutouts, you can go in any number of directions. Good. So again, I'll have a little clear up of this. While this continues to dry, I might do a few bluesy greensy ones of these, so that I've got a variety. And then we'll just add a bit of paint directly to our pasty things. Yep, you know it. Always the sign of a good time. Right, I've moved most of that over just onto a piece of card so that they can all be drying, and I've reclaimed a bit of space on my craft mat to do the last little bit of painty play, this time thinking about copper rather than rust. And I've got, again, various. I've got PaperArtsy chalk acrylics here. I've got distress paints in various usefully coppery colours. The joy of distress paints is that they move and blend in deliciously inky ways. Very surprising product, really. So I think what I might do is just put a bit of each of these ones I've got here. I think I've got, oh, so this is, you wouldn't recognise it, Frayed Burlap, which is years old, and the Frayed Burlap turns into a wonderful green colour if you don't use it. So use your Frayed Burlap distress paint, or save it and get this brilliant olivey green. So a little bit of water in these, a little bit of mixing and messing on the mat, and then all I'm going to do is slide my surfaces through that painty mess, picking up hopefully quite random collections of colour, like so. Again, I can add more layers later, I can shift and I can change, but with distress paint it's always worth giving it a little spritz of water, because like distress ink, they will move and merge and react and blend in really beautiful ways. So let's get some more onto here. I haven't decided, this might eventually get cut apart, but at the moment I think I want to keep those two bits together, because that could be quite a dramatic piece in a journal page, something like that. Again, I'm going to give a spritz of water, and you'll see that paint, it's not like any other paint, distress paint. We haven't really done much playing with distress paint, and maybe we should. So again, I'm going to set that aside. Let's pick up the paint we've got, let's not waste it. I can also, of course, do this same thing with another wooden heart. And if I then use, for instance, a clear embossing powder over the top of a painty heart, you'll have something that looks like a coppery enamel, all kinds of things. In fact, we'll probably do a full session on doing that kind of thing, because it's such fun. But for now, I'm gonna just do a couple of those, and then I might just mop the rest of that up with, oh, well, look, we've got this. This is where I was doing my die cutting earlier. So it's got some gritty texture paste background on it. And what I think I might want to do is just use it to mop up the remainder of that ink. I don't know what I was experimenting, paint, distress paint. Easy mistake to make, because it does do lots of inky things. It's like light is both a particle and a wave. Distress paint is both a paint and an ink. That'll do for mopping up. I mean, that would make gorgeous background for just cutting greenery from, quite apart from anything else. And then again, just so we've got a difference, because distress paint has a lovely sheen, or a lovely sort of gloss to it. Let's contrast that with some chalky Fresco paint. So but I'm going to do a similar process. I'm just going to put some dots of, that's not a dot. That's a load of aquamarine paint. I'm not going to need anything like that much. So before it gets contaminated with anything else, I'm going to put some back in the pot. Simply don't need that much. There we go. That's more like the amount we need. I didn't shake it fully. I don't know if you could see, given we're in close-up, maybe you could. There was a little bit of separation of that paint, but that's absolutely fine. As you saw, I've just remixed it back up. because they have this wonderful chalky opacity, those chalk particles can sometimes separate from the carrying medium. So again, I've just got a couple of different colours. What have I got? Aquamarine, that was Lawn that just went down, and this is Paua shell, which is presumably some exotic shell that I've not met. But I'm going to do the same thing, give myself a little spritz of water there, and then just run this. I haven't even pulled apart yet. I think what I'll do is run it through and then immediately pull it apart. I think I probably need to pull it apart before it dries, because when it dries, in the process of drying, it may well make it difficult to get these delicate elements away from one another. But that means I've got my cutout and my numbers both done simultaneously. Let's dip the bottom of that frame in. You can see the colours are slightly different, of course, because colours vary a lot, but also certainly once they're dry, I think you'll see that there is a difference between chalky frescoes and slightly glossy distress paints. Lovely, messy mixed media fun I'm having today. I hope you are too. Grand. There we go. While this is on the mat, that's what I should have done with the distress paints, I might take a couple of these, wipe my fingers, there we are, take a couple of these ones that are still drying, but they're maybe mostly dry. Going to use probably quite a wet brush and create some sort of patina textures here as well onto those, so they don't all have to be rusty surfaces, but I could then highlight later with some rustiness. So let's have one of those. I'm grabbing these from the piece of card that I sent over here earlier. And then the other thing that is completely possible, and we're going to be doing some of this is mostly dry but not quite, but what I might do is take the risk of just adding a bit while it's still wet so that it really blends in, and then if I want a more defined highlight later, I can come back in when it's dry. But just having a little play. Grand. I'm going to make sure everything dries now and then come back and add top layers of paint to our unpigmented texture paste areas. These are now set aside to dry on the cardboard, and I've brought back our unpainted ones, but I've also brought back some of these ones that had the rusty pigment in them, because I think it's going to be quite nice to be able to add some extra texture and colour to those. I haven't fully wiped the craft mat because it's about to get messy again. So let's start with, we can just add some of this rusty paint. So again, I'm going to go with transparent yellow iron oxide. I'm going to have a little bit of this brown shed. I'm going to have another absolute rusty favourite, which is another of the DecoArts. This is Quinacridone Gold, and it's a joy for rustiness. If I had a go-to rusty product, it would probably be that one, the Quinacridone Gold Mixed Media Fluid Acrylic. So let's start with that on the mat. Did I put some brown shed? Yeah, that little bit is brown shed, isn't it? We could have a little bit more brown shed, although given the brown shed's not being very cooperative today. I've got mahogany here as well. Not sure I've ever really used mahogany very much. It's another Fresco paint. But again, this is not about going out and buying what I'm using here. This is about going to your stash, having a look for your rusty colours, your coppery colours, bringing them all out to have a play in lots of different mediums. Last week inks, this week paints and pastes. Grand. So for this, I think I am going to use a brush. I don't want a really perfect brush, probably. I want something with a bit of scabbiness so that I can add paint over these textures in quite a soft, loose way. Scribble, scribble. Get a bit of that. That was a deeply unhelpful alarm that just went off to tell me to do something I really didn't need telling to do. Great, so I'm playing with adding these paints quite loosely, quite softly. A little bit of water will help move things around, will help get that rusty variation, this time applied over the top of the texture paste that we had added. So the texture is already there, ready and waiting, and let's leave that to dry. Let's do one of these with maybe, generally it's a good idea to start with paler colours and then add darker ones. If you've got opaque paints, if you start with your very darkest colour, you're gonna have difficulty going paler afterwards. If your paints are translucent, building those layers can really be great fun, because adding one of the lighter layers over the top will change the shade. So that's quite an orangey rust, but I really quite like it. You can see there's paint arriving in various thicknesses on other things. I don't know, I might want to keep a couple of these to go bluey green, but I'm enjoying the rust really today, and I've got bluey green stuff over there. So you can see it's really up to you what order you go in. If you like the idea of mixing up some paint into your texture paste to start with, you can absolutely do that. If you prefer the idea of going with texture paste first and then just keep it in the texture paste state, there might be a day when you want a rusty textured piece, or you might want a green textured piece. And if you haven't made that decision yet, if you've just got untinted texture paste, you can go in any direction on the day of creating the project. If you've created it all as rusty in advance, you don't really have the option of going back, as it were. Well, I'm lying, because with paint you can always just put another layer on top. That's a great cog. I like that, with the deep dark of the raw umber as the undercoat. With some of these, what I want to do is to maintain some of that green coming through, so I'm not going to do full rusty coats on all these. I'm going to have some rusty areas and some areas where that stays. I need the yellow. That means I need a slightly clean brush, because that brush is very mucky now. That is, in case any of you are wondering, that is my regular spatter brush. So one of the other things you can do with these ones that have already dried, look at this rusty panel. When you use the heat tool, if it curves up, you can just bend it back into shape yourself, but it's also perfectly possible to just fire the heat tool at the back of it, and that will probably straighten things out. So these places where it was left white, I'm now going to put in a bit of yellow highlighting, like so. Let's use up what's on the mat here and just get these rusty. Got a lot of raw umber now. Let's get some Quinacridone gold and some more of the transparent yellow iron oxide. And you can hear from the name that that's going to be good for metal, can't you? Brilliant colour. So let's get some of those on there. I'm now back to one of my kids' craft brushes from the Swedish furniture shop IKEA in the children's department. The little sets of craft brushes, they cost a couple of euro or a few dollars, and you get, I think it's 5 or 6 brushes of various thicknesses, of various, so this is a flat, they also come in a round, and they're just brilliant. I'm now going to put a bit of water on here just to loosen up the paint that I've got, so that it will paint more easily over that texture. There we go, that's what I need. because it's now so textured that getting paint down into those gaps between the sandy textures needs a bit more fluidity in the paint. That's a magic one. Love that. Love that. Quite want a bit more brightness onto here. So I'm just going to try and get a bit of that. What have we got left? These two. Oh, the heart. Let's do the heart. There we go. Oh, that is so good. That's mostly Quinacridone gold with a little bit of the transparent iron oxide, and if I want a bit of depth, just a little bit of raw umber in places. Magic. Let's maybe highlight this. One of the other things, too much dark on there, let's get rid of a bit, is distress crayon rubbed over this texture will work like magic to just highlight little lumpy bits and sandy bits. That's a nice cog. Let's grab that cog. Good. A little bit more on this cog maybe, just in the places where I've already got it red. I think we'll let the rest be green. And then these two, maybe I do want them to be greeny bits. Can't decide. Let's have one, let's have this be rusty. And I'm perfectly happy for paint to get on the back of there as well, because as I say, that's going to just make it a more sturdy object in the long run. Paper can be flimsy. Paper, once it's got paste on, is a little bit more sturdy. Paper, once it's painted, becomes different again. And so you're just building a thing with a bit more longevity, a bit more staying power, and a bit more presence in the world. That's quite a pale one because it's got a lot of the yellow oxide in, but I think that's pretty good. Nice golden glow to that rust. Grand. I'm a real mess now, which is wonderful. I love it. I'm going to put some, I might do a mixture actually of distress paint. Oh, let's wash out my beautiful splatter brush. Don't want anything further happening to that. I ruined it successfully once. And this is the Paua shell, and I think they're going to be quite a good combo. A little bit of Aquamarine, I think this is PaperArtsy, and maybe a little bit of, what are these two? Oh, well, let's have Salvaged patina, shall we? Given we're doing patinas. So I want this not only for going on here, I'm going to give myself again a little bit of that fluidity, because as we know, distress paints react really happily to fluidity, but the Fresco paints quite like it too. I almost always work with watery washes of paint just because I feel it allows me to build up layers in an interesting kind of way. Grand. That's really nice. A little bit of Paua shell at that end. Gorgeous texture. The sand texture paste or grit paste, whatever it is, sandy textures are really just fabulous to play with. Let's have a little bit on this fish spine. I don't know why I think of this as the fish spine. Can't imagine. A little bit on the back again, because this one is sort of snakily fragile, it feels, although I've not had one come apart on me yet. But that again just gives me a delicious thing to play with. And then, of course, one of the things that I really enjoy over the rust is, with the spatter brush, to do a little bit of bluey greeny. Oh, it's now gone brown because I've still got brown. Spatter, there it goes. Where the rust is still wet, or the paint is still wet, that's going to mix in one interesting way. Where it's drier, that's going to mix in another interesting way. But it just gives me these sort of highlight moments of rustiness and copperiness operating together. I might try and pick up a bit more of the blue. Yeah, that's nice. And again, it's about sort of fooling the eye. the eye understands the rust even more when it's got that contrasting blue and green going on. That's delicious. Really delicious. If you feel the spots are too spotty, just a quick dab will soften the look of them, or a little spritz of water, especially with the distressed paint, will create a variation. Grand. I'm going to zoom in for a close-up in a moment so that you can see all these delicious rusty textures. I'll bring back the distressed paint ones. Hopefully they'll have dried nicely. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of rusty patina playtime. If you've enjoyed it, please do give me a thumbs up. Leave any comments or questions down below. And as always, I'll try to leave useful information about the ingredients I've used here. But this really isn't, I will say it again, this really isn't about having to go and, oh look, I didn't ever paint this. I wonder. This isn't about going shopping for loads and loads of stuff. This is about going for a little dig in your supplies for rusty looking things, and then, as I've been doing today, having a play and seeing where that takes you. Hee glad I remembered about him. Scrumptious. Thanks so much for your company on this creative journey. It's always a joy to hear from you in the comments. Have a great week and happy crafting all. Oh, just look at those fingers.